Welcome to tonight's story. Tonight's story is yours alone. Settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind drift as I take you on a journey. A journey where dreams and reality blend into something soft, soothing, and full of wonder. With each word, the world around you will grow quieter, your body will relax, and your thoughts will slow like gentle waves on a calm shore. There's no rush, no worries, just the comforting embrace of a story that will carry you peacefully into sleep. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the story begin. The Lullaby of the Forgotten Moon. Chapter 1. The Last Note. The forgotten moon was dying. Queen Selene could feel it in the marrow of her bones, in the trembling pull of the heavens as the silver light flickered in the sky. The very air in the celestial ruins was thick with silence, as though the world itself held its breath, waiting. She stood alone beneath the crumbling arches of the ancient temple, where time had worn the stone into jagged remnants of the past. Carvings of old songs, etched into marble, shimmered faintly under the moonlight. The remnants of those who had come before, the Songweavers, the keepers of dreams, watched from statues draped in ivy, their eyes hollow, their lips frozen mid-hymn. This was her burden now, to finish the song. Selene exhaled softly, adjusting the silver lyre in her hands. Its strings hummed beneath her fingertips, charged with magic as old as the stars. The lullaby of the forgotten moon was nearly complete. Its verses carried through the wind, stitching together the delicate veil that separated dreams from waking reality. The final note remained, and it was the most important one of all. She closed her eyes. Then she sang, "Hush, my star, the sky still waits, soft as dawn, the silver gates. Sleep, my love, the dream is near, safe within the moonlight sphere." The melody curled into the night, filling the ruins with a soft radiance. The lyre's strings quivered as the song reached its final verse, each note threading itself into the fabric of the heavens. The forgotten moon pulsed in response. Its light wavered, struggling, as if reaching out, as if waiting for her to finish the song. Selene took a breath. She pressed her fingers against the final chord, and she sang. But the note did not come. Silence, Dot. The air collapsed into stillness, the sound of her own heartbeat the only thing left in the void. The ruins, the statues, the whisper of wind, all faded into a terrible, suffocating hush. Her fingers trembled over the lyre's strings. She tried again, desperate, but there was nothing. The last note, the one that would anchor the forgotten moon in the sky, the note that would seal the dream vial, was gone. A sharp, cold wind ripped through the ruins. Overhead, the forgotten moon shuddered, its silver glow flickering like a candle about to go out. "No," Selene whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. The sky, vast and endless, began to fracture. The stars trembled, their celestial hum turning dissonant. The fabric of the heavens, so delicately woven, was coming undone. The ruins trembled beneath her feet. The wind carried with it a distant scream, the sound of the kingdom below stirring in fear. Selene turned sharply toward the village nestled in the valley, her breath catching, where once the forgotten moon's glow cradled the land in silver light. Now shadows crept through the streets. The people of Lunareth were waking, and something else was waking with them. Selene clutched the lyre to her chest, dread curling through her like ice. She had failed. The lullaby was incomplete, and with it the forgotten moon began to fade. A deep, resonant laughter echoed from the darkness of the ruins. She turned. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a shifting form cloaked in night, its edges blurred like smoke caught in an unseen current. The shadowed one. "You sang so beautifully," it murmured, stepping forward. Its voice was rich and silken, like a song sung backwards. And yet, the final note is lost. Selene staggered back, her heart hammering. "You did this." The shadowed one tilted its head, amusement glinting in its abyssal eyes. "Did I?" It gestured toward the sky, where the forgotten moon shrank, its glow draining away, bleeding into the nothingness beyond. "Or was the note never yours to sing?" Selene gritted her teeth. "I memorized every verse, every note. This was fated." A smirk curled at the edges of the shadowed one's lips. "Ah, but fate is such a fragile thing, isn't it?" It lifted a hand, its fingers curling in the air. A ripple of silence expanded from its palm, a void swallowing the remnants of the song. Selene's chest tightened. This was wrong. She had prepared for this moment all her life. The moon's song was meant to bind the veil, to keep dreams and nightmares from spilling into the waking world. But now, the lullaby was unraveling, and the balance was shifting. The shadowed one stepped closer. "Do you hear it, queen of the sleepless sky? The hush that settles over the world? Soon there will be no more dreams." Selene clenched the lyre, her nails digging into the wood. And then the first shadow moved in the streets below. Her breath hitched. A child stood at the edge of a cobbled path, her hands clutched to her head, her eyes wide with terror. Around her, the villagers stumbled from their homes, dazed, confused. Souls who had never known waking nightmares now trapped in them. Selene knew what was happening. Without the forgotten moon, there was no veil to separate the two worlds. Dreams, memories, nightmares. They were spilling into reality. The child let out a choked sob. She turned to run. But something tall, thin, and wrong unfolded itself from the shadows behind her. A shape without form. A whisper given life. The first nightmare to slip through. Selene's pulse roared in her ears. The girl screamed, and the moon blinked out. Darkness swallowed the sky, and with it the first nightmare reached for the waking world. Chapter 2. The Song in the Wind. Astra had always heard the music in the wind. Even as a child, she could sense melodies curling through the trees, slipping between the rooftops of Lyria village like whispers carried from a distant place. It was never a full song, only fragments, a hum that tickled the edges of her mind, a rhythm woven into the night air. But on this night, the music was different. It was calling her. She stood at the edge of her family's small home, the wooden shutters creaking in the cool breeze. The village lay bathed in darkness, its narrow streets illuminated only by the faint glow of lanterns. And yet, something was wrong. The wind no longer hummed. It whispered. She tightened her cloak around herself, stepping onto the quiet path that led to the old market square. Find the song. Astra froze. The words had not come from the wind alone. She spun around, expecting to see someone standing in the darkness, but the street was empty. A shiver traced down her spine. She exhaled, shaking off the unease. She was imagining things, that was all. And yet, the whisper had felt real. She took another step forward, following an unseen pull in her chest, something deep and instinctual. It wanted her to go. And so she did. The old market had long since been abandoned. It sat at the farthest edge of Lyria, where the forest stretched out in endless twilight hues, its trees swaying like silent watchers. Astra hesitated at the entrance, her fingers brushing against the worn wooden beams of a collapsed stall. The village elders warned children never to wander here, not since the night the moon flickered dot. But tonight she had no choice, because the whispers had led her here, and the music was waiting. She stepped inside. The remnants of old stalls leaned at odd angles, their signs faded and broken. The scent of rain lingered in the air, mixing with the damp earth beneath her boots. At the center of the ruins stood an abandoned chest, half buried in the tangled roots of a gnarled tree. The moment she saw it, Astra's breath caught. The whispers stopped. A heavy stillness settled around her, thick and expectant. She knelt, brushing away the vines that had wrapped around the chest like skeletal fingers. The wood was old, too old, as if it had been here far longer than the village itself. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among scraps of silk and dust, lay a music box. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Carved from pale silver, its surface was etched with constellations she did not recognize. A delicate key protruded from its side, as if waiting to be turned. Astra swallowed. She reached for it, her fingers grazing the cool metal, and the moment she touched it, the melody began to play. It was haunting. A song both familiar and foreign, a melody that tugged at something buried deep within her. The notes unfurled like a memory she had never known, filling the air with a delicate sorrow, as if the stars themselves were weeping. The wind shifted dot and then... Astra. She gasped, the music box nearly slipping from her grasp. The voice had been close, too close. Her eyes darted around the ruins, her pulse hammering. The trees swayed, their branches creaking, but the air was still. She was alone. And yet the whisper remained, curling through her mind like mist. Find the song. Her fingers tightened around the music box. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't her imagination. Something, someone, was speaking to her, and she knew, without understanding how, that it was connected to the song. The lullaby was unfinished. Astra inhaled shakily. She glanced back down at the music box, watching the key turn on its own, the song continuing to play. The whispers had led her here for a reason. She had to find out why. The night deepened. Astra did not return home. Instead, she wandered through the outskirts of the village, the music box clutched tightly in her hands. She could not silence the melody in her mind. The more she listened, the more she felt something missing. A final note, a whisper of something lost. She followed the feeling beyond the village, past the lantern-lit pathways and into the shadowed meadows beyond. The whispers did not return, but the air itself felt different. The world around her grew too still. And then a figure stepped into her path. Astra halted, her breath catching. The stranger stood beneath the ancient willow tree at the meadow's edge, bathed in the silver glow of the forgotten moon, or what was left of it. He was tall, his cloak flowing like liquid shadow, blending into the night. But what struck her most was his eyes, a piercing, unearthly silver, glowing faintly in the dim light. The music box stopped playing. Astra's grip tightened on it. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger tilted his head. "Calum," he said. His voice was calm, but beneath it lay something unreadable, something knowing. Astra's heart pounded. "Why are you here?" He took a slow step forward. "Because you have found something that should have remained lost." Her fingers twitched against the music box. "This song." She hesitated, searching his face for answers. "What is it?" Calum studied her as if considering how much to reveal. Then at last he spoke. The last remnants of a lullaby that was never meant to be forgotten. The air shivered around them. Astra felt it. A shift, a crack in something unseen. And then the whispers returned, but this time they were not alone. Something stirred in the darkness beyond the trees. Not a voice, not a whisper. Something watching. Calum's silver eyes flickered toward the shadows. His expression changed. "Astra," he said quietly, his voice suddenly urgent. She swallowed hard. "What?" He stepped closer. His presence was steady, but his gaze burned with something close to warning. "You need to run." Astra barely had time to react before the night ripped apart. Chapter 3. The Breaking of the Dream Veil. The night split apart. Astra stumbled backward as the shadows beyond the trees came alive. The whispers, once elusive and distant, surged forward in an invisible force. No longer just voices, but something real, something reaching. Calum moved first. His cloak billowed as he stepped between Astra and the unseen force. A hand lifted, and from his palm silver light ignited, carving a protective barrier around them. The air shimmered where the light touched, warding off the darkness like a shield. Astra pressed a hand against her racing heart, trying to make sense of what was happening. What is that? Calem's eyes were sharp, scanning the darkness with precise stillness. His fingers curled at his sides, ready, waiting. The first sign. Astra swallowed. Sign of what? He turned to her. The glow of his silver eyes reflected the dim remnants of the forgotten moon above. His voice was grave. The dream veil is breaking. The words hung between them, heavy, final. Astra frowned. The dream veil? Calem studied her. Then, as if realizing she did not understand, he exhaled. It is the barrier that separates the waking world from the realm of dreams. He cast a glance toward the shifting shadows at the edge of the clearing. If it collapses, nightmares will no longer be bound to sleep. They will cross over. Astra's stomach dropped. You mean into reality? Calem nodded. She stared at him. That's impossible. That's impossible. Nightmares weren't real. They belonged to the depths of the mind, to sleep, to fear in its safest form, ephemeral, temporary. They weren't something that could walk, that could hunt. And yet, something stirred beyond the trees, something watching. Astra gripped the music box tightly in her hands. Calem's voice softened, though it remained laced with urgency. It's already begun. Astra felt it, a deep, subtle pull in the air, like a ripple in a vast, unseen ocean. It was faint, yet unmistakable, something shifting in the fabric of the world. She shook her head, trying to process it all. Why is this happening now? Calem hesitated. Then carefully he said, because the lullaby of the forgotten moon was never completed. Astra's breath hitched. The song. She glanced down at the silver music box, its carved constellations gleaming under the night sky. The song it played had felt incomplete, like something was missing. Calem stepped closer. The lullaby was meant to bind the veil, to keep the worlds apart. But when the last note was lost, the balance began to fray. Astra shook her head. But that was years ago. The forgotten moon faded before I was even born. Calem's expression darkened. Time is irrelevant to the magic that holds the veil. A lullaby is a spell in disguise, and a spell unfinished is a spell unraveling. Astra tightened her grip on the music box. So what do we do? Calem's gaze met hers. We find the missing verses, before the last note fades forever. The wind howled, and beyond the meadow's edge something stepped forward from the shadows. Astra sucked in a breath. It wasn't human. It was tall, thin, and wrong. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, elongated like a creature pulled from the darkest corners of the mind. Its face was absent, a hollow mask of shifting black. A nightmare. Calem didn't hesitate. His hand lifted and silver light erupted from his palm, blasting toward the creature. The nightmare recoiled, letting out a soundless scream as the magic struck it. The air around it rippled, distorting like a mirage. Astra took a step back, her pulse roaring in her ears. Tell me that's not real. Calem's jaw was tight. It is now. The nightmare shifted. Its limbs twitched, elongating further, its faceless form tilting unnaturally, as if trying to perceive them. Then, slowly, it stepped forward again. Calem's silver eyes narrowed. Run. Astra didn't need to be told twice. She turned and bolted. The nightmare moved. A shrieking wind tore through the clearing as it lunged forward, its form unraveling and reforming as it glided, hunted, after them. Astra's heart pounded. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted across the meadow, Calem close behind her. The village was too far. There was no safety there, not anymore. Calem grabbed her wrist mid-stride. This way! He yanked her toward the forest's edge. Astra barely managed to keep her footing as they plunged into the trees, branches whipping past them. The nightmare followed Dot. It did not run. It drifted, as if the air carried it forward, silent, relentless. Astra fought the rising panic in her chest. Where are we going? There's a place. Calem's voice was strained, his grip firm. A place where the veil is still strong. Astra gritted her teeth, pushing herself faster. And you didn't mention that earlier? Calem shot her a sharp glance. You weren't being chased by a nightmare earlier. Fair point. Branches cracked behind them. The nightmare was gaining. Astra's lungs burned as they weaved through the trees. The path beneath them was uneven, but Calem seemed to know exactly where he was going. Then, suddenly, a sharp drop. Astra skidded to a stop just before the ground vanished beneath her. A ravine stretched before them, cutting deep into the forest floor. At the very bottom, a river of dark water churned, its surface reflecting nothing but blackness. Astra spun to Calem. What now? The nightmare loomed behind them. Calem's silver eyes darted between the ravine and the creature. Then, jaw tight, he turned to Astra. Do you trust me? Astra's eyes widened. What? No, you can't just ask that right now. He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed her hand and jumped. Astra screamed. The wind roared as they plummeted into the darkness below, and above them, at the edge of the cliff, the nightmare watched Dot waiting. Chapter 4. The Starlit Pool. The wind howled past Astra's ears as she fell. She barely had time to register the darkness swallowing her before ice-cold water slammed into her body, knocking the breath from her lungs. The river pulled her under. Astra thrashed against the current, her limbs flailing, panic spiking through her chest. Water roared around her, deafening, pressing against her skin like a heavy weight. She kicked, trying to surface, her lungs screaming for air. A hand gripped her wrist. Strong, steady. Calem. A burst of silver light flared beneath the water, rippling through the river like a pulse of energy. The current suddenly stilled, as if the very water obeyed Calem's command. Astra broke the surface, gasping. Calem dragged her toward the riverbank, his grip firm. The moment her feet touched solid ground, she collapsed onto the damp earth, coughing violently. Her soaked cloak clung to her skin, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Caleb knelt beside her, watching her carefully. "Are you hurt?" Astra waved a weak hand. "Just drowning a little." Caleb huffed but didn't comment. He rose to his feet, scanning their surroundings. They had landed in a hollow beneath the ravine, surrounded by towering stone walls that curved overhead like the ribs of some ancient beast. Starlight pooled in the crevices of the rock, casting a faint silver glow over the damp moss and slick stones. Astra pushed herself upright, shivering. "Where are we?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the far end of the cavern where a narrow pathway led deeper into the underground. His expression was unreadable. "The only safe place left," he murmured. "For now." Astra swallowed, glancing behind her. The nightmare hadn't followed them yet, but she could still feel its presence, like an itch in the back of her mind, a shadow lurking just beyond sight. Caleb turned back to her. "We need to move." Astra forced herself to stand, ignoring the ache in her limbs. "Where are we going?" "To find someone who can help." The cavern opened into a winding tunnel, illuminated by glowing blue fungi clinging to the walls. The air grew thick with magic, humming in Astra's bones. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a hidden glade, bathed in an otherworldly twilight. And at its center, a man sat beside a large obsidian anvil, his fingers carefully sculpting something from thin air. A dream forger. Astra had heard stories of them, mages who could shape the essence of dreams into something tangible. The man's silver hair caught the faint light as he worked, his movements fluid, precise. The moment Astra and Caleb stepped into the clearing, he lifted his gaze. His eyes were gold, not the warm gold of the sun, but sharp, molten, like something smoldering beneath the surface. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. Astra tensed. "You know us?" Elior smirked. "I know you." His gaze flicked toward Caleb. "And I know you wouldn't come to me unless you were desperate." Caleb sighed, rubbing his temple. "Elior." Elior held up a hand. "I already know what you want." He gestured to the anvil, where an unfinished melody shimmered in the air, fragile and incomplete. "The song, the missing verses." Astra's breath caught. "You have them?" Elior tilted his head. "Not all of them, but I know where the second verse is." Caleb folded his arms. "Then tell us." Elior grinned, slow and sharp. "I could, or—" He leaned back against the anvil. "You could convince me." Astra scowled. "We don't have time for games." "Neither do I," Elior said lazily. "But the last time I helped a Songweaver, my price went unpaid, and I don't work for free." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" Elior studied him for a moment. Then he smiled. "A dream." Astra frowned. "What?" Elior tapped a finger against the anvil. "I'm a dream forger, remember? I shape dreams, create illusions, but I have none of my own." His gaze turned to Astra. "Give me one of yours, and I'll tell you where to find the verse." Astra hesitated. Give up a dream? She wasn't even sure how that worked. Caleb's expression darkened. Elior? It doesn't have to be much, Elior interrupted. Just a small dream, a childhood memory, a forgotten wish. He spread his hands. A fair trade, don't you think? Astra exhaled, then nodded. Fine. Elior stepped closer, pressing 2 fingers to her forehead. A chill swept through her body, as if something unseen was unraveling within her. A faint golden thread of light pulled from her mind, wrapping around Elior's fingers before vanishing into the air. Astra gasped, suddenly feeling emptier, like something was missing, but she couldn't quite recall what. Elior pulled back, satisfied. Deal's done. He gestured toward the far end of the glade, where a narrow path wound toward a pool of water, glowing with starlight. There, you'll find your verse at the bottom of the pool. The water shimmered like liquid moonlight, smooth and untouched. Astra approached the edge cautiously. It's beautiful. Elior smirked. It should be. That pool is the closest thing we have left to the old magic. Caleb crouched beside it, his silver eyes darkening. The verses inside. Astra hesitated. How do I get it? Elior leaned against a tree. You dive. Astra blinked. What? Caleb ignored her protests. He reached out, brushing his fingertips against the surface of the water. The moment he did, the reflection changed. The night sky above them rippled into the water, stars shifting and rearranging themselves into notes of a song. Astra's heart pounded. That's, Caleb nodded, the second verse. Astra swallowed. She had no choice. She inhaled deeply and dove. The moment Astra submerged, the world vanished. The water was not cold, nor was it wet. It felt like stepping into another plane of existence, one suspended between time and space. Then, a memory surged through her. Not her own. She was standing in a grand hall of silver stone where the ceiling opened to a sky full of stars. A woman stood at the center, a queen with silver hair clutching a broken lyre. Astra knew her, Queen Selene. The queen's lips moved, though Astra could hear no words, but she could feel the song, the unfinished lullaby, and then the vision shattered. Astra gasped, choking as she burst from the water's surface, coughing and shaking. Caleb caught her, steadying her. What did you see? Astra's breath came in sharp gasps. She clutched Caleb's sleeve, her eyes wild. The queen, she whispered. I saw her. Caleb's expression tightened. Astra swallowed hard. She was trying to finish the lullaby. Caleb nodded grimly. Then it's true. Astra's fingers tightened around his wrist. Caleb. Her voice was unsteady, her heart racing. There's something else. Caleb frowned. What? Astra's voice trembled. She failed. Chapter 5. The Song of the Moon. Astra stood at the edge of the ancient lunar altar, the melody of the lullaby still lingering on her lips. The realization struck her like a celestial storm. This song was never meant to destroy the moon. It was a hymn of protection, a safeguard woven into the very fabric of the stars. Her hands trembled as she traced the symbols carved into the silver-laced stone before her. The truth was hidden in plain sight, buried beneath centuries of fear and deception. Every note, every whispered lyric, had been designed to shield the moon from forces unknown, not to shatter it. Yet Lady Visara had told her otherwise. The High Enchantress of the Celestial Order had warned that completing the lullaby would bring catastrophe, that it would crack the moon's surface, send its fragments tumbling into the abyss, and plunge the world into darkness. But if Astra had learned anything in her long, winding journey, it was that truth was often distorted by those who wielded power. A gust of cold wind swept through the ruins, sending a flurry of stardust into the air. Astra closed her eyes, listening to the song that had been passed down for generations. Her mother had hummed it to her as a child, her voice soft and full of longing. Shine bright, my silver light, safe from dark and endless night. Astra parted her lips to sing the next verse, but before she could, a presence stirred behind her. "I cannot allow this," came a voice like the chime of distant bells, ethereal yet heavy with authority. Astra turned sharply, her heart pounding against her ribs. Lady Visara stood at the base of the altar, her midnight blue robes rippling like liquid shadow. The crescent sigil on her forehead glowed faintly, casting an eerie shimmer across her pale skin. Her silver eyes were unreadable, but Astra could feel the weight of her resolve pressing against her like an unseen force. "You deceived me," Astra accused, voice steady despite the storm within her. "You told me the song would destroy the moon, but it was meant to protect it, wasn't it?" Visara's expression remained unreadable, but her fingers twitched slightly, as if resisting the urge to strike. "You do not understand what you are meddling with, child." "Then make me understand," Astra demanded. "What are you so afraid of?" A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Then, in a voice laced with sorrow, Visara said, "The lullaby does not merely protect the moon, it seals something within it." Astra's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Visara stepped closer, her presence an eclipse swallowing the light. "There are things beyond the veil of our world, Astra, ancient things. The song does not simply guard the moon. It keeps a force bound within its core, one that should never be awakened." Astra shook her head. "Then why would my mother teach it to me? Why pass it down for generations?" "Because your mother, like those before her, was a guardian of the song. She knew the balance that must be maintained." Vesara's voice was almost pleading now. "Do not let your curiosity unravel what countless generations have kept at bay." Astra's mind swirled with possibilities. If Visara was telling the truth, then finishing the song could unseal something unimaginable. But if she was lying, if this was just another manipulation, then the moon remained vulnerable to whatever forces sought its ruin. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying whispers of lost voices. Astra turned her gaze toward the altar once more. The lunar symbols glowed faintly, urging her forward. "I have to finish it," Astra whispered. "I have to know the truth." Visara's eyes darkened and the air between them pulsed with energy. "Then you leave me no choice." With a flick of her wrist, the high enchantress conjured a barrier of silver fire, its glow casting jagged shadows across the stone. The flames pulsed outward, forming a circle around Astra, locking her within. "Do not force my hand," Visara warned. "Step away from the song." Astra clenched her fists. She could feel the melody thrumming in her chest, calling to her, urging her to complete it. If the song truly sealed something within the moon, then she needed to understand what, not simply accept the warnings of someone who had already deceived her once. "You always feared the power of the song," Astra said. "But I don't. I hear it. I feel it." And with that she began to sing. "Guarded light in endless sky, hear my voice, do not deny." The moment the words left her lips, the air trembled. The lunar symbols flared to life, casting silver beams that cut through the night. Visara lunged, her hands weaving sigils in the air, but Astra did not stop. Bound in silver, bound in stone, safe and sound, yet not alone. The altar quaked beneath her feet. The fire surrounding her flickered, twisting as if it too were caught in the song's spell. Visara let out a sharp cry and unleashed a wave of energy, but Astra stood firm. The lullaby was no longer just a melody. It was a force, an ancient power rising from the depths of time. And then a crack split through the sky. Chapter 6, the third verse. Astra's fingers trembled as she brushed away the ivy from the weathered stone. The inscription was barely visible, worn by time and hidden beneath nature's grasp, but she could feel it, the weight of the words pressing against her mind, as though they had been waiting for her. "The third verse," she whispered, her breath forming a mist in the cool night air. Calum stood beside her, his expression unreadable, his silver eyes flickering in the torchlight. He had been uneasy since they stepped into the ruins, but Astra had been too consumed with her search to question him. Now, as the words revealed themselves under her touch, she sensed his fear. She traced the carved letters carefully, whispering the verse under her breath. "In twilight's breath the dreamer calls, through shadowed vale where silence falls. One step beyond, the lost will rise, when moonlight bleeds in hollow skies." The moment the last syllable left her lips, a sudden gust of wind howled through the ruins, extinguishing the torch. The air turned thick, oppressive, and Astra's heart pounded against her ribs. Then the world shattered. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the darkness. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the very air around them seemed to ripple. Astra clutched her head as a piercing shriek tore through the silence. From the broken ruins the shadows shifted, elongated, and came to life. Nightmare creatures. Their forms were indistinct, shifting between shapes, elongated limbs, gaping mouths filled with jagged teeth, eyes that burned like dying stars. They crawled from the darkness, their bodies coalescing into something unnatural, something wrong. "Astra, run!" Calem's voice was sharp, urgent, but she was frozen. The creatures were drawn to her voice. The lullaby, it had awakened them. Before she could react, one of the creatures lunged. A blur of black mist and crimson eyes rushed toward her. Calem moved faster. He grabbed Astra and pulled her against him, his arms forming a shield around her. In that instant, a silver light exploded from his body, forcing the nightmare creatures back. They shrieked, recoiling from the glow, their forms unraveling like mist caught in a storm. Astra gasped, looking up at Calem. His face was twisted in pain, but he didn't let go. What is this?" she stammered. Calem didn't answer immediately. The glow around him wavered, flickering like a dying flame. Then he whispered, "I was afraid of this." The creatures circled them, hissing, their elongated limbs twitching with hunger. The air was thick with their whispers, voices layered atop each other, speaking in a language Astra couldn't understand. But she could feel their intent. They were waiting for the shield around Calem to falter. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Calem's grip on her tightened. "It's not what I did," he said, his voice rough with strain. "It's what you sang." Astra's stomach twisted. "The third verse. Calem's silver eyes met hers, filled with something deep and sorrowful. "The lullaby isn't just a song, Astra. It's a curse." A cold dread slithered down her spine. I thought the verses were meant to seal something away," she said. "They were," Calem said grimly. "But each verse also holds power. Power that can awaken what was meant to be forgotten." The nightmare creatures inched closer, testing the boundary of Calem's light. Astra clenched her fists. "Then what do we do?" Calem exhaled sharply. "We need to leave. Now." Astra nodded, and together they moved. Calem kept one arm around her, guiding her through the ruins, his silver light flickering as he fought to keep it steady. The creatures followed, their whispers growing louder. "Sing for us. Sing the next verse." Astra's breath hitched. "They want the fourth verse." Calem's grip on her arm tightened. "Then we must make sure they never hear it." The ruins trembled, the nightmare creatures howled, and then one of them lunged. Calem turned, throwing up a barrier of light. The creature slammed into it with a shriek, but the force of the impact sent Calem staggering back. His face contorted in pain, and Astra realized his shield was failing. She couldn't just stand there, Dot taking a deep breath. Astra reached for the only weapon she had left, her voice. She didn't know if it would work, didn't know if it would help or destroy them, but she sang. Not the fourth verse, not the third. She sang the first verse, the verse that had started everything. "Sleep, sleep, dreamer bright, drift beyond the endless night, where light and shadow softly weave in silent songs of those who grieve." The moment her voice filled the air, the nightmare creatures recoiled. The darkness that had threatened to consume them trembled, and for a brief second the ruins stood still. Then, with an ear-splitting wail, the creatures dissolved into smoke. Astra's knees buckled and she collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. Calum knelt beside her, his breathing ragged. You banished them, he murmured. She swallowed hard. I don't think they're gone for good. Calum nodded grimly. No, they'll return, and next time they'll be stronger. Astra looked at him then, at the way his shoulders trembled, at the pain etched into his face. The silver glow around him was fading. Calum, she whispered. What are you? He hesitated, then reached for her hand, pressing it against his chest. Beneath his shirt, beneath his skin, she felt something. Something ancient. A pulse that didn't belong to a human heart. A connection to something far greater. I am bound to the lullaby's fate, he said softly. Just as you are. Astra's breath caught. Bound. The realization settled in her bones like ice. She had spent so long chasing the lullaby's secrets, but she had never imagined it would entangle her so deeply, or that she wouldn't be alone in it. Calum offered her a small, weary smile. We need to find the fourth verse before they do. Astra swallowed hard and nodded. Then let's go. As they stepped away from the ruins, the wind carried the echoes of whispers, faint but persistent. Sing for us, Astra. Sing the next verse. But she would not yet. Not until she knew the price of the song. Chapter 7. The Shadow's Whisper. Astra stood at the threshold of the veil, the thin barrier between the twilight realm and the waking world. The silver thread of moonlight wavered in the air before her, pulsing softly, beckoning her to take the final step. But something else stirred in the darkness beyond, the presence that had haunted her dreams, slithering in the corners of her mind. A voice, smooth as silk yet jagged as broken glass, curled around her senses. Do you truly believe in their promises, Astra? Do you think the return of the moon will bring salvation? The Shadowed One. It emerged from the gloom, its form flickering like a flame caught in an unseen wind. A figure draped in tattered robes, neither man nor beast, but something older, something that had seen the moon fall and had whispered through the ages since. Astra's breath hitched. She had always known the Shadowed One would come, yet the weight of its presence coiled around her like an iron chain. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady though her fingers trembled at her sides. The figure tilted its head as if amused. You have been told this is a moment of restoration. But what if it is not? What if the moon does not bring light, but darkness? The air grew colder, and the silver thread dimmed. The whisper of the veil shuddered like a living thing. The moon had been lost for centuries, cast from the heavens, its light extinguished. The high sages, the Order of the Crescent, even Calum himself had believed that its return was their only hope. But now doubt curled around Astra's thoughts like creeping ivy. Lies, Calum spat, stepping forward, his silhouette cutting sharply against the darkness. You poison her mind because you fear what is coming. The shadowed one chuckled, low and patient. Fear? No, I only understand what you refuse to see. The moon was banished for a reason, and you, dear Astra, would do well to question why. She clenched her jaw. She had spent her life yearning for the return of the celestial body that had once bathed their world in silver glow. The very idea that it could be dangerous felt wrong. But what if it wasn't? What if everything they had been told was half a truth, woven together to lead her here, to this very moment, to a choice she was never meant to make? Calum grasped her wrist. Don't listen to it. You know what must be done. The silver thread pulsed again, growing fainter. Time was slipping through her fingers. If she hesitated too long, the moment would pass, and the veil would close once more. But the weight of the shadowed one's words anchored her to the spot. What if they're right? She whispered. What if I'm making a mistake? Calum's expression tightened. Then we face it together. The shadowed one sighed, a sound that almost seemed regretful. You are the key, Astra, but a key can both unlock and imprison. Choose wisely. The veil trembled, the silver thread flickered. Astra took a breath and stepped forward. Then the world shattered. A scream ripped through the darkness, echoing across the abyss. But it was not hers. It was the moon's. Chapter 8. The Sacrifice of a Songweaver. Astra stood at the edge of the forgotten lake, moonlight shimmering on its still surface. The air was thick with whispers, the trees swaying as if they knew what she had come to do. The lullaby pulsed in her mind, the melody soft, calling to her like a lost memory waiting to be reclaimed. This was the final step, the moment where everything would come together, the key to breaking the cycle, to bringing peace to those trapped within the shadows. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, steadying her breath. It had taken her so long to understand the lullaby's power, to piece together the warnings hidden in riddles and dreams. Now she knew the truth. She had always known, hadn't she? Deep inside, the answer had been waiting. To sing was to surrender. Her dreams, the ones that had carried her through the darkest nights, that had whispered of a future filled with endless possibilities, would vanish. The song was a key, but keys came with locks, and this one would seal her fate. A rustling came from behind her. Astra turned sharply, heart hammering against her ribs. The shadowed one emerged from the darkness, his silhouette cast in silver light. The ever-present mist curled around his figure, reluctant to let him go. Don't. His voice was hoarse, urgent. Astra, you don't understand. She swallowed hard. I do. Then you know what this means. He stepped closer, his golden eyes fierce with something that looked almost like fear. If you finish the lullaby, there will be nothing left for you. You'll give up everything. Your dreams, Astra. All of them. A shiver ran down her spine. It's the only way to stop this, to end the curse. His hands clenched at his sides. No, it's the only way to bind yourself to it. Astra's breath caught. What do you mean? The shadowed one hesitated, a war waging in his expression. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of centuries, he whispered, because I've watched someone else do the same, and I lost her forever. The words hit her harder than she expected. Who? Her name was Lyrian. She was like you, brave, determined, ready to sacrifice everything to make things right. She thought she could break the curse, but the lullaby doesn't work that way. He ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration evident in every line of his posture. It doesn't end things, Astra. It binds you. It turns you into part of the song. That's why the voices in the mist never fade. They were all like you. Like her. Astra's knees nearly buckled. She had spent so much time believing she was close to the answer, but this changed everything. No, she whispered. That can't be true. Do you think I would lie about this? His voice cracked, raw with emotion. I tried to stop Lyrian, just like I'm trying to stop you. But she didn't listen. She sang, Astra, and the moment the last note left her lips, she was gone. Not dead, not at peace, just part of the song. The lake rippled as if responding to his words, as if it held its own secrets beneath the surface. Astra's fingers curled into fists. Then how do we break it? She demanded. There has to be another way. The shadowed one shook his head. No one knows. Maybe there isn't one. The wind carried the echo of the lullaby, soft and sorrowful. The same melody that had been waiting for her, that had drawn her in since the very beginning. Astra's pulse pounded in her ears. The choice stood before her, heavy as a storm about to break. If she sang, she could end the suffering. She could give peace to the ones lost in the shadows, but she would never walk away. Her dreams, her future, gone. The shadowed one reached for her hand, his touch surprisingly warm. Please, he murmured, desperation bleeding into his voice. Don't make the same mistake she did. Astra looked up at him, at the pain carved into his features, at the ghost of loss that lingered in his eyes. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. The lake shimmered again, the voices growing stronger, calling her, begging her. She took a step closer to the water's edge, and then darkness surged from the depths, a shadow rising like a beast awakening from slumber. Astra barely had time to gasp before it lunged. Chapter 9. The Final Note. Astra's voice wavered on the final note, but she forced it out, steady and true, letting the melody weave through the air like a thread spun from silver. It carried across the lake, resonating with the rippling water, the towering trees, the very fabric of the night itself. A hush fell over the world, as if it too was holding its breath for what was to come. Then a tremor. The moon, once dormant, flickered with an ethereal glow. Pale light stretched across the heavens, washing over the dream veil. The mist that had long clung to the edges of reality shuddered, unraveling and reforming in its true, undistorted shape. The shadows that had haunted these lands recoiled, twisting upon themselves before dissolving into nothingness. A deep, resonant sound reverberated through the world, a note far older than Astra's lullaby. It was the voice of the moon itself, awakened from its slumber. The sky rippled like water, its surface disturbed by the force of its own rebirth. A figure appeared at the heart of the celestial radiance. Queen Selene. Her form, once trapped in the veil of forgotten dreams, solidified as the light embraced her. Silver tresses cascaded down her shoulders. Her eyes, ancient and knowing, flickered open as she took her first breath in centuries. The dream vial had restored her. Astra fell to her knees, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. She had done it. The song had worked. The world had been set right. But something was wrong. A numbness spread through her, slow at first, then creeping with undeniable finality. Her breath hitched as she clutched at her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs in a desperate attempt to anchor her. The world around her still gleamed with newness, but within her, something vital was fading. A cold realization settled in her bones. Her dreams were gone, not stolen, not shattered, simply absent. She reached for a memory of hope, of distant aspirations she had once held dear, visions of adventure, of love, of an unshaped future waiting to be molded, but found only an empty void where they had once lived. The price had been real. Queen Selene stepped forward, her expression one of sorrow and gratitude. "Astra," she murmured, her voice like a lullaby all its own. "You have saved us all. The dream veil breathes once more." Astra tried to answer, to smile, to bask in the victory she had fought so hard to earn, but the words would not come. The hollowness inside her grew, swallowing more than just dreams. It was taking her light, her fire, the essence of who she was. Her fingers trembled as she lifted them to the moon's glow. She could feel its power, could sense the majesty of its rebirth, but it was distant, out of reach, like a story told in another lifetime. She turned to the shadowed one who stood apart from the light, his golden eyes locked onto her with something bordering on anguish. He knew. He had always known. "Astra," he said softly, stepping toward her. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the ground beneath her wavered, shifting like a mirage. The edges of her vision darkened. The weight of the sacrifice pressed upon her, heavier than she could bear. Then, as the world celebrated its restoration, Astra collapsed into the void. Chapter 10. The Echo of a Song. Astra stood beneath the vast night sky, her breath slow and steady as the weight of all that had transpired settled within her. The dream vial shimmered on the horizon, its delicate threads no longer fractured, but whole. The air smelled of morning dew, though dawn had not yet arrived. The stars above blinked in their silent vigil, watching her as she watched them. There was no emptiness inside her anymore, not in the way she had feared. The absence of dreams had not left her hollow. It had simply made her different. She was no longer tethered to the realm of endless possibility, of hope and illusion. But there was a quiet certainty now, a strange sense of peace she could not explain. She closed her eyes and let the night wrap around her. A melody surfaced within her mind, the lullaby, the same one that had shaped her fate. It no longer held the same sorrow, the same tragic weight. It was simply a song now, hers to carry however she pleased. Softly, she hummed it. The sound drifted through the air, mingling with the cool breeze. It was not the same as before. There was no magic behind it now, no power to shift the fabric of reality. And yet, as she let the last note fade, something happened. A shimmer danced across the sky, faint but unmistakable. Astra opened her eyes just in time to see the stars flicker in unison, as though something ancient and distant had stirred in response. Her heart clenched. A trick of the light, surely. A coincidence. And yet, somewhere in the depths of the cosmos there was an echo. Faint, almost imperceptible. But it was there. A harmony rising in the wake of her song, like a voice answering from beyond the veil of space. The stars were singing back. A slow, bittersweet smile spread across her lips. No dreams would come to her when she closed her eyes tonight. No visions of the future, no lingering hopes of what could be. And yet, she was not alone. She lifted her face to the heavens, watching the sky for a little while longer. The world had changed. She had changed. And that was enough. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Astra turned and walked forward, toward whatever came next.